An African regional conference on nuclear disarmament and lethal autonomous weapons was held in Pretoria today. 17 African nations have signed the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, but none have ratified it. The objective of the treaty is to prevent the increase in the use of nuclear weapons. Well, eNCA's Khayelihle Khumalo attended the conference and joins us now. Khaya, good evening. Now, why has no African country signed the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, even though they have signed it?
Well, Vuyo, this has been really attributed to a number of reasons. For example, when you look at the continent itself, there are very few countries that you can even think who may have the capabilities of this nature. We know that, for example, when you look at South Africa in the early 90s, there was a voluntary dismantling of these particular weapons. So hence there is a very hesitation from the side of the African nations. As much as quite a number of them they supported the adoption of this particular treaty. But, I mean, frankly, quite a lot of them, they really don't have such facilities. But more importantly, another argument that came quite vociferously during the course of the summits, they were saying, look, already you have an NPT, which is a non-proliferation treaty, which was adopted in 1995. But other than that, you also have, within the continent itself, you have Pelindaba Treaty, which also governs the use of these particular weapons.
What was the point of this conference then, if no one has appetite for it? Besides, people can't even afford it.
I think mainly they're trying to get this particular treaty to be adopted officially as part of the international law. So for this particular treaty to be adopted as the international law, it requires at least more than 50 countries to adopt it, and then some to ratify it as well. So then that's when the enactment will happen. But apart from that, I think there is quite a desperation from the side of the campaigners, but also we know South Africa has always been pioneering and so outspoken on these issues when it comes to nuclear, because there's a very clear understanding that the world really doesn't need these particular weapons. You look at as far back as in 1945, that US attack to Hiroshima in Japan, that was quite severe, very catastrophic impact. So there's a clear understanding that we don't want to go there, especially given the very uncertainty, the tension that you see, the unilateralism that you see from the side of the US, North Korea, as much as they're promising to dismantle their own facilities. So there's that very anxiety that is really creeping up.
In fact, that's exactly what I wanted to ask. I mean, if there's an acceptance, right, that no one has appetite for this, at least for now, right, and also that very few people can afford, there has to be a reason somewhere. You know, we may not know it, you know, today, but there has to be a reason why people felt that you had to have an African conference looking at this. What if I said, I mean, not too long ago, we were on the verge, a couple of months ago, in fact, we were on the verge of signing a nuclear deal with the Russians, but that was, I mean, for energy. Maybe it could well be that someone out there feels that maybe with China, you know, I mean, coming to the party and China's presence increasing on the continent, that the threat may be real. Or some rogue government or dictator somewhere may sell weapons, nuclear weapons, cheaply to African states.
It's a very complex issue, Vuyo, especially because when you look at some of the traditional countries who are known to have these particular capabilities, another point that really came patently clear is that some of these countries are actually blocking this particular ratification. So they really want to maintain the capabilities to themselves. They don't want to see this proliferation getting into other parts of the world. So there's a gatekeeping, for a lack of a better expression, that is happening here. But also from the side of the activists, I mean, they're talking about 50,000 of these weapons that are still out there in the world. But also, more importantly, they're talking about trying to avoid the proliferation. So they're saying that the world has seen so much suffering, and the last thing you need to do now is to spark this particular issue, and also to see these weapons being used willy-nilly, and also more importantly, so there's quite a lot of keenness ahead of the United Nations General Assembly this coming September. We know that there will be a peace summit, so the activists in a lot of African governments that we got an opportunity to speak to, they were saying, look, they really are aware that there hasn't been any ratification, and they're really keen to ratify it. It's just that there are lots of processes involved. It must go through a parliamentary process. And we also got that particular issue, especially from the Deputy Minister of South Africa, Llewellyn Landers, who said, for example, when you look at South Africa, from their side, it's an area they've always tried to pioneer to make sure that the world is totally eliminated of any nuclear whatsoever. So hence now this particular movement to make sure, for example, that more African countries are able to realize this.
Okay, well, I'm sure there are a lot of questions around this, and a lot of cynicism as well from some people who would have been, watching this interview. Hopefully, with time, those questions will indeed be answered. eNCA's reporter Khayelihle Khumalo, who of course attended that nuclear disarmament and lethal autonomous weapons conference that was held in Pretoria today. Well.